The next question is actually a conglomerate of questions from different people. They're all asking pretty much the same thing. So Brandon Bardo, Eric Alexander, Just Balance Matt, this is a composite of your questions to Paul, which are all about the same topic, such as life in it of itself is spiritual, and our mission is to stay grounded enough to fulfill our purpose on this earth and this life. So when world situations such as now, with the divide between beliefs, corruption, rights being taken away, and so on, are occurring, how does one continue to remain grounded, spiritual, and playing the middle ground to find balance while not remaining ignorant to what's going on around you? So the other questions are, what practices would you recommend for staying centered at this time? And what practices do you use to help support times of change, uncertainty, and possibility?
Well, what I do, that's a multi-pronged question. So first of all, staying grounded, it can be very stressful. I find myself at times having to go out to my rock garden and put my feet on the earth. I find working in nature very grounding, very helpful. I also think it's very important to disengage from as much of the mainstream media, television, social networking as possible. I tell people all the time, use your phone as a tool. Don't let it use you as a tool. So the best thing you can do with those types of things like social media is share things that are true to the best of your ability, because anything you share that's true is likely to get censored. But you can always email people, you can call them, you can use images and art and song, any way you can convey the truth to people. There's an old saying, I believe it came from the book called The Philosophy of Science, that says a little bit of nonsense repeated regularly for just 10 years can wipe out 100 years of truth. And that's terribly true. But if it's true, it must also be that the inverse of that is true. A little bit of truth repeated regularly for just 10 years can wipe out 100 years of nonsense. And that's where I put my heart and soul. So being the change, exemplifying what it is that you're suggesting to other people, being vital, being healthy, being open-minded, being willing to look at opposing viewpoints and find the best aspects of both viewpoints is very, very critical. You know, there's a center of gravity in any culture, society, group, or family. And generally, based on psychological research, about 90% of the US population, which is probably a good reflection of the world, has not evolved past the development of a 12-year-old psychologically, which makes these people highly susceptible to manipulation, control, and that's the people that are the low center of gravity because they haven't really learned to think for themselves. They're very happy being unconscious and caught in sheep herd mentality because it allows them to be unconscious. And, you know, really thinking for yourself is real hard work. That's why David Bohm and Carl Jung almost said in parallel, real thinking is hard work. That's why most people just rearrange their prejudices and call it thinking. So when we tell people things to help clarify or enhance their lives, such as eat organic food, move your body, things like that, if we don't wear the change, then it's just another thing that has no evidence. So to them, it's just another conspiracy theory, which is one of the most famous ways of sidestepping an encounter with reality by the unconscious people of the world. It's also a tool of manipulation by the greedy people of the world to use that. But for me, prayer is one of my main practices, and I don't mean just sitting and praying. I use a variety of techniques, but I paint a lot. So I paint things that symbolize my year or what I want to connect to, or my podcast logo. And then what I do is I use that image as a symbol, which all symbols have transcendent function, which means they connect you to what is beyond the symbol. So for Christians, the symbol of Christ being crucified, which often people wear around their necks, is really not meant to be looked at in and of itself. It's a symbol that gives you the opportunity to transcend the stories in the Bible and all that and have your own intimate relationship with Christ. Or it could be Buddha, or it could be any number of highly evolved beings or people that inspire you. So for me, each day, I start my day by connecting to all the beings and people, whether they're alive or not, and giving thanks for all that they've taught me, and thanking them for the motivation, inspiration, and support to live and love fully in my life. And then there's other techniques I use, from Tai Chi to a variety of meditations. Painting is also a form of meditation for me. But really, each of us needs to develop a routine that grounds us in the things that are most important in life, which is why my 4 doctor system is so critical. So if you don't do things that are happy making for you, move your body, your emotions, and your mind effectively to orient yourself toward your own stated dream goals or objectives, get adequate rest, eat for your body's unique individual needs, and support sustainable farming practices with your purchases, then we're always going to be out of balance. There's no such thing as a healthy 3-doctor person. So keeping yourself stable means doctor happy, using your mind to create what you want, not what you don't want, having values around happy making, movement, diet, and rest, and introspection, and then letting those values guide your choices. Your yes has no value till you learn to say no. Without values, you don't know when to say yes or no. So you become a target for anything. You're like a kitchen sink that people throw everything in, including vomit. And there's no restriction on that. And then you end up just feeling like a dirty kitchen sink and looking like one, and wondering why the world's falling apart and why you're falling apart. Certain things need to be washed outside. Certain things need to be washed in solvents in a mechanics workshop. Certain things need to be washed in the mind, etc. So my point is that you don't just throw everything in a kitchen sink because you have values that determine, whether or not you should clean engine parts in there or not, or if that should be done in a bucket in your garage. So really, it's a combination of all these factors. It's really important to look at each of those 4 doctors and be very conscious that your dominant thoughts create your reality. We are projecting our beliefs onto the screen of the world, and the screen of the world mirrors it back to us. A simple analogy for that is if you go to a party with a friend, but you're in a snotty mood when you show up, and your friend's in a great mood, when you leave the party and your friend that was in a great mood arriving says to you, "Wow, that was such a great party. What'd you think?" You're likely to say, "Oh, the people were boring. There was nothing to do and the food was shitty." Yet your friend had a completely opposite experience at the same party with the same food with the same people. So it's important to take responsibility for your inner state and your mental state. And that's why I always say, be clear what your dream goal or objective is for your life or on any given day. Identify where you're out of balance and make that your spiritual practice to bring that into harmony. And keep your feet on the earth. Make time to empty your mind. The mind gets very, very cluttered, and that leads to chaos, nervousness, and anxiousness, which in our culture means lots of prescribed drugs, which means high levels of toxicity, which means high levels of cortisol and disability of the immune system. And then you become a target for everybody who's got a game going in the so-called medical system, which is not a medical system. And even if you go to most holistic healthcare practitioners, unfortunately, most of them don't have any real training in getting to the etiology or the cause of what ails people. So sadly, a lot of them are doing palliative care. They're doing it in more non-invasive ways. But ultimately, all behaviors are the result of beliefs, and beliefs and behaviors lead to choices, which create the circumstances not only of our life, but of everybody's life. So in a nutshell, live the way that you know if everybody lived, it would make the world a better place, and then share it in non-invasive ways and be creative about how you share it. Sometimes taking a direct approach isn't as effective as taking an indirect approach. So, for example, instead of telling somebody how they should eat or how they should live or who they should vote for, if you hand them a book and say, this is a great book, I learned a lot from it, let me know what you think, then you're doing what's called using third-party endorsement. For example, telling anybody in your family that they should get off of gluten or processed sugar is not going to go well. But if you hand them a book like Sugar Blues and they read it and it blows their mind, they might start being more conscious of what they're doing to themselves and learn exactly what happens when you eat too much processed sugar by reading the book. So there's a tangential approach, kind of like a 90-degree angle approach. Sometimes the ego is so desperate to validate itself, it goes head on with people and creates clashes, and then they won't follow your advice because they're rebelling against you, so it's ineffective. So I think I've summarized how I do it. It is truly a firewalk, and we're in a very, very dangerous time in the evolution of humanity. And if you study history, whenever a culture begins to get too complex, it starts to break down and crumbles. So, we've seen a lot of empires come and go: the Incan Empire, the Mayan Empire, the Egyptian Empire, the Roman Empire. And, we're obviously very close to that form of collapse. And we've got several psychopaths with too much money for their own good taking over the planet. And that mirrors the unconscious of the world population back to us. So the best thing that we can do is to educate people to the best of our ability and be a living example and contribute to healing the world in ways that feel loving and nurturing to you, which is why I say, if you love to sing, sing truth. If you love to dance, dance the truth. If you love to write, write the truth. If you love to paint or draw, then paint and draw the truth. And that's how we get messages to people. For example, an image is worth 1,000 words. So a good artist can capture a lot of truth and emotion and create a lot of movement in somebody with a simple image. So each of us has the opportunity to find out what it is that is a natural expression of our love and use it to add more love in the world. And the more chaotic the world is, the more important it is for us to disconnect ourselves from the sources of brainwashing and perpetual trauma that leave people nervous, anxious, flooded with cortisol, and unable to think creatively, which is exactly what they're trying to do. So I hope that gives you a little overview of at least how I do it.